Washington. Maybe sort of which people are less well known played a huge role in the process.
Well, I was particularly impressed with, well, several, I have to admit, but two in particular. Maybe I'll say three and try to talk fast. Who
you
don't
talk fast anyway.
Yeah, good. Who don't get much credit. One, just because he's so engaging, is Gouverneur Morris, who was a fellow in his mid-30s, a big strapping guy. He had a peg leg from he lost a leg in an accident. Quite a ladies' man. Everybody wanted to think that the accident had been flight from a jealous husband, but the official story is it wasn't. Although John Jay wrote about it that way, which was a whole new way to think about John Jay. And he spoke more often than anybody else at the convention. He was a bit of a gadfly, but he gave a wonderful speech about slavery. It was the subject everybody danced around for a couple of months, and he really gave this oration that can still send chills down my spine. And Madison wrote it down, which I got to give Madison credit for doing that, as a slaveholder, where he called slavery the curse of heaven that would curse this nation forever. And the motion he made was supported by one other delegate out of the 35 or 40 who were there that day.
Abolition? Or?
It was to abolish the slave trade. But I think he very much changed the dynamic of the convention, and they did end up restricting the slave trade. Not as much as they should have, no doubt, but it was a different time. He also wrote the final draft of the Constitution, which I'm so frustrated he doesn't get more credit for this. I mean, there are other things in my life that are more frustrating, but you know, we deify Jefferson for the Declaration, which is a good job, but it's a rant. I mean, it's not that hard, you know? And with Morris, he had to take all this goo. I mean, they had all these amendments and modifications and motions, and it was tough stuff, like eating steel wool, and make it into the Constitution, which it's not perfect. There are some passages that you really could sharpen up, but he did it in 2 days.
Yeah, that's remarkable. Really.
Pretty good job.
Because it wasn't like he was just sort of editing here and there. He reorganized it completely, dropped whole passages.
There were 23 articles. He made it 7.
Yeah.
I mean, he really did an amazing job.
And he was using a quill pen, presumably, too.
He did not have, well, you know, cut and paste and all those things that we do. Just quickly, James Wilson of Pennsylvania was, I think, probably the best lawyer in the room. He was, his client was the King of France. It's got to have been a good client in those days. And was a terrific thinker and came up with a couple of the critical compromises. He thought up the Electoral College, which is a mixed bag, but it got them over a hard spot. And John Rutledge of South Carolina, which if you fought your way through the book, you know, I end up really acknowledging him as the closest thing I think of as the father of the Constitution. It was sort of hard to come to that view because he was an ardent defender of slavery. But by the measures that I found myself applying, did the debate change after he spoke? Yeah, the debate changed after he spoke. Who served on the committees? Most of the tough issues were resolved in the committees. Well, he served on most of the committees. He was on 5. Who chaired the committees? He chaired 3, and he chaired the big one that produced the first draft of the Constitution. And they did amazing things in that committee. So it was sort of kicking and screaming, but I ended up concluding that he was a powerful force there and a much neglected character in history.
One of the things you find out at the end, of course, is that at least 2 of the people you just mentioned, Wilson and Rutledge, kind of disappear from the history books because their lives didn't go so well after the convention. So you might want to fill us in about that.
Yeah, they embarrassed their peer group a lot. And so really for about 100 years, nobody wrote anything about them because they ended so badly. Wilson was a crazed, I'm not coming up with the word, he was greedy. He wanted to be rich, so he got involved in terrific land speculation schemes, got way overcommitted, and ended up on the lam from the law. He was imprisoned. He was a Supreme Court justice. He was imprisoned for a while for debt, and then he went on the lam again. There were 4 states in which he couldn't sit, and he finally was confined in North Carolina, in Edenton, North Carolina. They made a deal with the court. It was really poignant because his creditor was another delegate, Pierce Butler from South Carolina, but it was $200,000, which was a lot of money in those days. And he stayed at, I think it was the Hornblow Tavern. He had to stay there until they paid off the debt, which he would never be able to pay off. And he was there for 4 months until he finally had a stroke and died. He got malaria. So a Supreme Court justice on the lam, it just was embarrassing. And Rutledge,
It was even worse.
whom I've just, well, but actually I find a little more human. He had a bad go. It was about a 6-week period when his wife and mother died, and he clearly went into a depression, which is in the early 1790s, and it's not clear he came out of it. He was sitting as Chief Justice of the South Carolina Supreme Court at the time, and was appointed to be Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court in 1795 by Washington, which was an amazing thing. The vacancy came up because Jay resigned, and Rutledge wrote a letter saying, "I'd like to be Chief Justice," sent it to Washington, and Washington by return mail said fine, and appointed him, because he respected him so much from his performance at the convention. But there was a lot of word out that Rutledge was crazy, and so he didn't get confirmed. He also had opposed the Jay Treaty in a vitriolic and stupid way, which had killed his chances. So he was the first Supreme Court justice defeated for confirmation, and right at that time, he walked into the Ashley River and tried to drown himself, and was pulled out, ironically enough, by slaves. So he embarrassed everybody, too. So Wilson and Rutledge have done poorly. You won't find good biographies of either.
Well, how about people whose role, sort of looking back, has been inflated instead of being